Hello and welcome to session 7 of the MOOC on the recommendation of youth work. So up until now we've been discussing the context in which the MOOC was created and the substance of the MOOC itself. So now we know what the MOOC is, where it came from, why a MOOC, we knew where the recommendation came from, why a recommendation, who made the recommendation. So this is a very important module. This is the what next of the story. It's how do we use this recommendation on youth work to improve practice and policy in Council of Europe member states and who knows beyond. So this is going to be the practical episode, some signposting into the roles of different stakeholders engaging with youth work around the recommendation. And yes, that can be summated into the form of one word, which is advocacy, and it's advocacy between different stakeholders around this recommendation. So yes, slide 1. So advocacy, as I mentioned, that is the tool. The recommendation really is a tool for advocacy. It's a summation. It's a summary of some policy recommendations around youth work, and it's a tool to remind stakeholders around these policy recommendations at all levels, from local to national, regional, international. And our working definition for this MOOC module on advocacy is a means of initiating change by proposing policy solutions, and that's what the recommendation on youth work is. It's a policy solution for concerns around youth work, and we are initiating change by proposing this recommendation to stakeholders at different levels. So just to hit off an example for this, considered as a road next to a school, a dangerous road, then stakeholders who are affected by this, such as parents and parents' committee at a school, the teachers' union, young people themselves organising, could engage with another stakeholder who is an authority, who has control over this situation, and could advocate for a safer crossing. So they've proposed a policy solution to an issue they see and have communicated it to an authority. So then taking this back to the context of the recommendation, we can ask how we can use the recommendation to advocate for legal reform, much in the same as the manner of the example I just discussed. We can use this recommendation to advocate to the state for them to create policy change in line with the recommendation to create that enabling environment for youth work. And also how we can provide frameworks for civil society organisations themselves to advocate at different levels, local, regional. How we can also use the recommendation at an interpersonal level to change cultures around appreciation for youth work, and to create an appreciation, recognition of youth work at a local and interpersonal level as well. So shifting norms around youth work as well. The advocacy, that is advocacy itself, and that can be done around the youth work recommendation. So why is advocacy important? That will be the next bit. So why is advocacy important? Well, in a representative democracy, decision-making authority is delegated to representatives that we elect, and by virtue of this, decision-making power doesn't vest in each individual. We secede our sovereignty up towards the state and decision-makers within the state. So they are making decisions not on their own perspective, but it's essential for a functioning democracy for the different perspectives within society to be represented within these decision-making processes of our representatives. So individual perspectives, group perspectives, sector perspectives, through advocacy, you can ensure that those perspectives are represented in formal decision-making processes of our democratic structures. And yes, it is vital to democracy for the laws and decisions we are making to hold sufficient input legitimacy. So it's not just our elected representatives acting autonomously, that they are engaging with the will of the people who are being affected by this legislation that they're considering. So input legitimacy, civil society plays a huge role there around advocating on behalf of interest groups to ensure that people affected by legislation and law are having input into its formation and passing. So in practice, what does this mean? Well, if an interest group is going to be advocating on something, it needs to first form a position, and this position is going to be based on the network's perspective and experience and the evidence it has access to. consider the first one there, experience. So this is going to be, for example, if there's a youth work network in a country and it has a network of 500 youth services or youth clubs, it has a collective experience there, a collective, a substantial kind of sectoral representative mandate where it can make claims on the basis of its representative mandate. So it can say, in the next budget, we need significant reinvestment in certain areas, and we know this based off of our experience in this area and as a network of 500 youth clubs. And an interest group can also form its position based off of evidence. So this is more a majoritarian advocacy exercise. So consider an organization looking at evidence, or they don't necessarily need first-hand experience, but they're advocating on behalf of advocating policy solutions based off of evidence that they can have access to. So again, there's a blurry line between the two of these. Most advocacy will hold anecdotal or testimonial content, as well as being substantiated or reinforced by evidence that organizations have access to. And some civil society organizations are larger than other and use different balances of these two while communicating to the relevant authorities. So what form of advocacy is there? So advocacy really ranges from highly formal to structured interest group advocacy to media and mass advocacy to community and interpersonal norm shifting. So that's very wordy, but let's consider highly formal and structured interest group advocacy. So maybe in a governmental or parliamentary committee, national civil society body or business group will be presenting their perspectives on some legislation or policy to parliamentarians, or presenting a policy report at a political briefing. This is very structured, it's direct to political decision makers and proposing a direct political solution. That's highly formal and highly structured. And then if we step down in terms of how structured it is, look at media and mass advocacy. So media advocacy, that's advertisements, engaging the media to reach large amounts of people. So consider in the run-up to a referendum or around a certain piece of legislation, you can run an advert, to change political perceptions or mass political perceptions of an issue. And then community and interpersonal norm shifting. Advocacy does not necessarily need to be civil society organizations engaging with state decision makers. You can also consider if there's a group of refugees moving into a community, you can run a workshop inside a school around refugees and awareness of the situations that they're coming from, and change individuals' perspectives and start shifting norms at this local interpersonal level. You have been advocating a certain perspective or viewpoint or political perspective to these people, and you've started shifting norms at a local level. And this does play into formal advocacy. So the more that the community, the people, the norms are on your side as you are advocating formally, the more chance you have of having some political capital behind your arguments. So it's essential to not focus purely on highly formal structured interest group advocacy, but also to be focusing on hitting national and community norms through media and mass advocacy and community action. So now we've discussed advocacy, so now let's think about the recommendation as a tool for advocacy. So for advocacy towards the state, the recommendation, it's already legislation that is agreed at an intergovernmental level within the Council of Europe. The Committee of Ministers has already approved this document and the policy calls within. As such, it's a document of law, it's legislation, it's a commitment that states have already made, it's a policy commitment or recognition of policy aspirations or policy standards that have already been made by all member states of the Council of Europe. So it's a tool for advocacy because it's something that we can remind member states of previous policy commitments with. And it doesn't have, it has force of law, but it doesn't make any concrete, it doesn't have any force because it doesn't mandate the state to deliver anything. It is a recommendation. So it does have force of law, but it's not mandating action. So it's more staking a claim to what policy they stand for in a certain area. So this is what we can remind member states of, that this is something they have already committed to. And in that sense, it's a great policy tool for advocacy, formally and at a national level with municipalities, just to remind people that it already has state recognition and approval. So how is the recommendation a tool for advocacy? Yes, so for youth work service providers, it's an accessible and practical vision for youth clubs and services. So what does this mean? Well, the recommendation presents a vision for youth work, and this message doesn't necessarily need to be advocated solely at a national level or to decision makers, and then implemented into policy and then trickling down to youth work practitioners, service providers and youth clubs. We can go directly to youth clubs and say, look, here's a vision for youth work. Can this help you to articulate your perspective on youth work and what you believe youth work stands for? Can this become useful for you at a practical level in terms of practitioning as a practitioner for youth work, and as you are engaging with youth work at a local level? And also, can you use this yourself as an advocacy tool to your local authority and decision makers and funders? So that's the second group that we can engage with. And also advocacy and civil society organizations. So yes, what's important is that we ensure that more civil society organizations are working with the recommendation. So take a coalition perspective response to this advocacy. Consider what other sectors would have interest in this recommendation, and how can we ensure that we as potential lobbying organizations are on the same page and are working together on this. So yes, coalition building, and it plays into a larger picture that for advocacy to happen, for civil society to operate, there is an environment that civil society organizations need to effectively operate and to effectively advocate. And as I said at the beginning, civil society organization bodies and organizations, they're really a respected voice, respected for their specific competence in certain areas. And as such, it would make sense to engage these bodies when asking for policy reform and ensure that we're on the same page with regards to what policy calls we are making. And yes, again, it increases the input legitimacy and necessity of evidence-based advocacy, etc. Yes. So policy cycle, policy formation, we need to ensure that this recommendation is referenced at all stages as we're going for changes. The policy cycle, I'm sure this is widely known, but we need to be engaged at all stages, from agenda setting to implementation and evaluation, and ensure that these considerations of the recommendation are seen as a baseline standard that we can be injecting into all these stages of the policy cycle. So there's a task attached to this module. Again, it's a self-reflective exercise. There's a PDF or some text below this video that you can see and read, and it's an activity for you to reflect on advocacy within your setting, to consider as a youth worker, as a practitioner, in your setting, in your region, in your nation, who are the decision makers with regards to youth work policy, who's making the decisions, who are the authorities, how is this policy affecting you, how would you advocate for change, which organizations would you engage with. So very practical considerations with regards to that, to help you reflect on it within your own setting, and as such it will become far more useful to you. Yes, so thank you for watching this module, and I hope that you tune in for the next episode, where we'll be discussing a scholarship opportunity for a policy advocacy session in Brussels this October. So if you watch next week's episode, I'm sure you'll find that interesting, and it's a great opportunity to put what you've learned in this MOOC into practice at a training course further. So thank you very much for watching.